So it's 2022, and I want to talk about the Wii U. I've always considered myself a massive Nintendo fan, but every villain needs an origin story, and mine really begins with this lunchbox. The GameCube wasn't my first exposure to Nintendo, or even gaming. I had a Game Boy Color growing up with classics like Rescue Heroes Fire Frenzy, and Arthur's Absolutely Fun Day. Yeah. I started console gaming when my dad gave me his old PlayStation with Crash Bandicoot Warped. I was obsessed with Crash Bandicoot as a kid and dreamed of working for
Sony Computer Entertainment America
one day. But in the periphery, I knew there were even more colorful mascots to love with Nintendo. I remember playing a bit of Super Mario 64 at my cousin's house growing up and being wowed at the more open 3D level design and free roaming controls. But I didn't get my own Nintendo console experience until I begged and begged for a GameCube for my birthday. I think I bullied my mom into letting me open it a day early. I was a feisty boy. Armed with a GameCube and essentials like Luigi's Mansion, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and Fairly Odd Parents Breaking the Rules, I was off to the races. Thankfully, as the years went on, I was less focused on those licensed games and became more and more enamored with Nintendo's own properties. I'll keep it brief, but Luigi's Mansion, Smash Brothers, Mario Sunshine, Wind Waker, so many of my favorite games come from this period and really helped to solidify my tastes. I liked bright and colorful worlds. I liked easy to grasp but surprisingly nuanced gameplay. I liked a healthy dose of exploration and discovery around every corner. It was around this time I got hooked on Nintendo Power, starting with the Chibi Robo issue while visiting my grandma. I convinced my parents to subscribe after that, and ever since, every month, I got to read all about the past, present, and future of Nintendo. As we moved into the Wii and DS era, I was keenly aware of everything coming down the pipeline, and would spend every car ride to school reading and rereading and rereading copies of Nintendo Power, even if they were months old, just to learn as much as I could about this company. And all this useless knowledge was put to good use thanks to the Wii's Virtual Console. The Virtual Console meant that, for the first time, Nintendo's back catalog of NES, SNES, and Nintendo 64 games were getting consistent digital re-releases, each of which were, in turn, covered by Nintendo Power. The more I read, the more I learned about the classics of days gone by, and whenever I could get my hands on a Wii Points card, I'd spend hours debating which classics I wanted to buy. The Wii gave me my retro education. Playing games like Super Mario World, Star Fox 64, the original Paper Mario, Super Mario RPG, Super Metroid, and so many more. I spent this console generation becoming a veritable database of useless Nintendo knowledge. You couldn't bully me, I knew what Earthbound was and you didn't! As the Wii's lifespan was coming to a close, I was eagerly awaiting what Nintendo could possibly do next. Their next console, codenamed Project Cafe, would be their first HD console, and was meant to finally be the bridge between the casual market of the Wii and hardcore gamers. Finally, a Nintendo console you could talk about without being bullied, because everybody would want one. So, in June 2011, I went to IGN to check out their E3 coverage, and finally got to see what this Project Cafe was all about, now with the official name of Wii U. This announcement gets a lot of flack for focusing so much on the new controller that it forgot to emphasize that this was a new console. And fair enough, I don't think it was nearly as intuitive to the blue ocean market of grandma hosting bowling tournaments in her retirement community. The name certainly didn't help either. Nintendo had released so many accessories and alternate control schemes during the Wii era that you'd be forgiven for thinking the Wii U was just that. However, as someone who was following E3 coverage at the time and had the warped mind that only a middle school Nintendo fanboy could have, it actually made perfect sense to me. The Nintendo DS was probably the gaming device I spent the most time with as a kid, with a collection of both well-known and niche titles that I'm still proud of. My taste peaked in middle school. What I saw was just a natural merging of the best of their handheld and the best of their console ideas. I was sold on the power of touch controls ever since Pokemon Dash ruined my wrist. I've had Stockholm Syndrome ever since. The dual screen setup made perfect sense. I had been playing games for years on the DS that were able to separate maps or parts of the UI into one screen to free the other of clutter, or just go all out with the concept with complete nonsense like this. So the promise of seeing those advantages brought to a new HD console instantly clicked with me. There was just one thing keeping me, even me, hyped. The launch lineup. I'll never forget getting a Wii for Christmas in 2006, but as exciting and influential as the pack and Wii Sports ended up being, there was really only one game that I was dying to play. The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Even if it was also launched on the GameCube, the promise of a full-blown Zelda adventure at launch where I could swing my sword and aim my projectiles and herd goats was more than enough to get me hooked. Unfortunately, the Wii U launch didn't have the same killer app, at least for me. Sure, there are reports of bigger, more quote-unquote mature titles like Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect 3, and Batman Arkham City, but I already had a PS3 at the time. If I wanted to play those games, I'd have already picked them up there. That left me with the exclusives. Third-party wise, there was Zombie U, a game that eventually garnered a cult following due to its usage of the gamepad, but at the time, it just didn't grab me. I'm not much of a horror guy. For core first-party exclusives, the games that Nintendo and only Nintendo could make, the games that would finally show off what their beloved properties could look like in HD, we got New Super Mario Bros. U. Look at this model of Mario. Tell me this couldn't have been done before. Having the fourth entry of an already stale series that already had another entry come out earlier the exact same year was the biggest flop to me. Now, there's nothing wrong with the concept of launching a console with a Mario game. It's tradition at this point. But launching with a bland Mario game with nothing to call its own minus squirrels was a bad idea, and one that I think hindered the Wii U's chances of success. Now, if I had it my way and could reschedule what Nintendo worked on and when, I'd have rearranged the schedule to make Super Mario Maker the flagship launch title. Think about it, you still get all the buzz around a new Mario game, but this time with a genuinely exciting concept that helped justify the existence of the gamepad, the controller that the console launch needed to get people invested in. Combine that with a game design that's literally meant to provide endless content through user-created levels, and I really think this game could have helped save the Wii U as a launch title. Instead, the marketing was showing off boost mode in New Super Mario Bros. U. Does this excite you? Well, we ended up getting the Wii U for Christmas in 2012 with the stipulation that it was for the family and not targeted towards any kid in particular. This meant that the system ended up in our living room rather than the separate playroom where I kept my consoles hooked up. I honestly wonder how much the decision to put the Wii U in a separate room robbed my interest in the console for its entire lifespan. It was in a room that my family generally used for watching TV and sports games, not for playing video games. Now, I had a dedicated playroom for playing the rest of my consoles uninterrupted. Of course I was going to stay there. In addition to New Super Mario Bros. U, we got the Deluxe Bundle, which came with a black console, 32 gigs of storage, and a bundled copy of Nintendo Land. Now, I didn't have much interest in Nintendo Land before launch, as I assumed it was yet another minigame collection that the Wii was inundated with. And yeah, that's exactly what it was. However, it's actually the one game I distinctly remember playing during the launch, and in retrospect, I can see it for what it was. The shining gem in the Wii U's launch lineup. This was meant to be the game that justified the gamepad's existence, with a bevy of minigames using every possible feature in the controller, including the gyro aiming, the touchscreen, the microphone. It was going all out with the controller in a way Nintendo never really did again. It introduced asynchronous multiplayer to consoles, with one player using the gamepad competing against everyone else working together on the TV with their Wii remotes. This was the game that could have helped justify this bizarre Fisher-Price contraption. But sadly, it just never caught on like Wii Sports did. It didn't have the same pick up and play nature that Grandma could get into, with its one-to-one correspondence with a real-life activity. Instead, it was more like appealing to the board game crowd. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but some grandmas don't want to play anything more complicated than checkers or bowling. And that's okay. You're just not going to reach the same wide blue ocean market that the Wii did. Now at the time, I really just remember two parts of Nintendo Land. The Zelda minigame was like an on-rails shooter, and I remember having a blast, whether I was using the gamepad to mow down moblins with a volley of arrows, or the Wiimote to slice and dice them with a sword and shield. I also loved Donkey Kong's Crash Course, a giant obstacle course that required you to use every damn feature the gamepad supported to make it to the end. It's not much, but these are my core memories of the Wii U's launch, and they're pleasant enough. Well, that and how slow the console was at the time, especially with the OS updates I had to download day one before we could even play. After that Christmas, though, I really didn't end up playing our Wii U much. My interest was piqued when I got an HD remaster of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, my favorite game of all time. But again, with the console in our living room, I just didn't really feel drawn towards playing it over the privacy of the PS3 in our playroom. I was also getting older and more interested in more quote-unquote mature titles. I got my PS3 in late 2010, and this was my first exposure to an HD console. Although I originally bought it for Little Big Planet and Final Fantasy XIII, I was also playing bloodier, gorier games like Skyrim, Uncharted, the Metal Gear Solid series, BioShock Infinite, and The Last of Us for the first time. Now, these weren't games I could have ever touched with a 10-foot pole as a kid. But as I was getting older, finally being allowed to play these forbidden fruit outside of the kid-friendly Nintendo brand was eye-opening for me, and was primarily how I wanted to spend my console time in my teenage years. Now, that's not to say I gave up on Nintendo entirely. I'm one of the suckers who bought a 3DS at launch back when its premier game was a port of Street Fighter IV, and I don't even like fighting games. However, the 3DS library eventually grew to have a phenomenal first-party lineup of games. I'll be honest, I wasn't really actively following Wii U news for most of its lifespan, outside of occasionally checking in to check about that new Zelda game, but I was far more aware of what came out for the 3DS, and played plenty of its classics around release. I have so many fond memories blasting through Super Mario 3D Land, Link Between Worlds, Pokemon X, and even a shoddy port of Metal Gear Solid 3 as they were coming out. However, regardless of which games or consoles I was following during the Wii U, that period also lined up with another big change in my life, going through high school and college. High school was the first time I really had a big friend group, and for once in my life, I was going outside and actually socializing, instead of holding myself up in my room to chase Pokemon. I never let that nerdy side of me go, as any of my friends who made the mistake of ever mentioning Nintendo to me in the slightest can attest to. But my free time was often eaten up just walking around the mall or sitting at Barnes & Noble and chatting about whatever life had to throw at us. I still spent plenty of time playing consoles in high school, but once I went to college, that was mostly over. I brought a PS4 to school with me to use in a public space, but it wasn't really something I could play with privacy whenever I wanted. And with college, not only did I have friends, but they were all walking distance from me. And some even had alcohol. Of course, I was going to spend time with friends, and I don't regret that a single bit. I was also getting really into music at the time. I'd listened to a lot of prog and metal in high school, and in college I started to dive more into the history of punk and indie, so I had plenty to listen to. Plus, I never had a car in college, so much of my daily routine was spent walking place to place with headphones on. You know what media is perfect for consumption while walking? Here's a hint. It's not the Wii U. Funnily enough, we did have a Wii U in my college apartment. My roommate brought it along with a single game, Super Smash Bros. For Wii U. I bought the 3DS version at launch, but getting to experience Smash in all of its local multiplayer glory on an HD console for the first time was magical. And Smash ended up being the one Wii U game I can comfortably say I played a ton of while it was still active. One of our roommates just trolled everyone with King DDD, and as someone who could never get around his spike spams, I still harbor some resentment. But we still played Smash all the time, and it proved to be my favorite game on the console for years, and my favorite Smash in the series at the time. However, the Wii U was still sitting out in a public room that was really only fit for playing when all the lads could join in. I still didn't have a comfortable setup for playing big single-player Nintendo console games by myself. Until March 2017. The hybrid nature of the Switch doesn't mean that much to me anymore, now that I can easily play it on a TV whenever I want. But during college, this was huge. Playing a game as big as Breath of the Wild on the TV and moving to the bedroom when the boys wanted to play some beer pong finally gave me the flexibility I needed to properly enjoy a Nintendo console again. It doesn't hurt that the Switch lineup has been so stellar, with its 2017 releases including several of my now favorite games of all time, and ARMS! I was properly hooked by Nintendo again. I wasn't just following news, I was actively watching every Nintendo Direct as it premiered. I was on the hype train for every major release. I was eating up the ports of Wii U classics I never got to experience. The Switch era of Nintendo has meant so much to me, and single-handedly rekindled my love of this stupid company after a whole generation of indifference. So, why look back? In 2021, I got interested in trying to gather up all of my old childhood games to display on a nice shelf. See, when cases are scattered everywhere, it's considered hoarding, but on a shelf, it's collecting. However, there was just one issue. Although my parents kept all of my old discs, they no longer had the hardware to play them. Now, thankfully, I had held on to my PS3 and a lot of my old handhelds, but I could no longer play my old GameCube and Wii games I grew up with. With this in mind, I had two options: either buy a Wii, capable of playing both Wii and GameCube games, or buy a GameCube and a Wii U, where the GameCube could handle GameCube games along with Game Boy games if I ever invested in a Game Boy player, God, they're expensive. While the Wii U could handle Wii games through an HDMI cable, along with the added bonus of playing, well, Wii U games, if I were so inclined. Now, I obviously went with the second option. My thought process at the time held Wii U games as a nice bonus, in case I wanted to try any out, but I primarily just wanted to play Wii games and a nice HDMI output. I didn't think I'd really end up buying any Wii U games. Oops. So yeah, I ended up buying more and more games for the Wii U over the last year. And you know what? The more I've played, the more respect I've come to have for this console. We all know it's considered a failure, and for good reasons. It never justified the gamepad, the naming was poor, the marketing was confusing, it had long periods of software droughts, third-party support ended before it could even begin. But the exclusives the console did have? Honestly, they're pretty banging. Plus, the Wii U Virtual Console was appealing. The Switch still only had NES and SNES games, but the Wii U had so much more legacy content available, like N64 games. Oops. Well, hey, at least it had some other consoles like the GBA, with plenty of games I never got to play as a kid. Oops. Okay, but at least it has DS, which is cool, and hey, the Wii Shop channel lasted over 12 years. Surely this one will be around for a good while, right? Oops! I don't regret buying a Wii U, not in the slightest. The more time I've gotten to spend with this stack of games, the more I've come to appreciate it as a console. However, we can't dance around the fact that Nintendo is doing its darndest to flush whatever little the console had to offer the world down the toilet. With the closure of the eShop happening only 10 years after launch, the legacy content that honestly still dwarfs what the Switch has to offer is unfortunately being lost. Years before that, Nintendo shut down Miiverse, the official social media platform of the Wii U and 3DS. Users could draw pictures, post messages, form communities, and lots of games even tied heavily into Miiverse posts. Now, there's nothing, and these games feel a little hollow knowing what used to be there. Plus, there's the matter of Switch ports. For the record, I love that so much of the Wii U's library has been ported to the Switch. There were a ton of great games that never reached a broad audience due to lackluster console sales, so giving them new life on a platform where so many people, myself included, didn't get to experience them initially is nothing but a good time. Now, whether or not the prices of these ports are fair is another question, but I feel the existence of these ports is inherently a good thing and incredibly consumer-friendly. With all that in mind, there's no real reason to buy a Wii U in 2022. I can't recommend it. Its online services are already on death's bed, its games and audience have both moved on to the Switch, and there's just nothing really left here unless you care about the backwards compatibility, or the homebrew market. However, I'm a bit of a lunatic when it comes to Nintendo. I've been following their franchises religiously for close to 2 decades now, with one glaring exception: the Wii U era. I have this burning curiosity to look back at this era and all the games that I missed. I want to share my thoughts with the world at large, especially anyone else who missed out on this era of Nintendo like I did growing up. I'm going to be taking an individual look at the Wii U's biggest exclusives, devoting an entire episode to each one. I want to stress that my intention is not to justify the Wii U's hardware or to convince anyone to buy one. Again, don't buy one. Instead, I just want to evaluate the games themselves to better understand this console's legacy. To that end, while I'll primarily be playing the Wii U versions of these games if I can, there will be cases where I'll just go ahead and play the Switch port instead if I happen to already own it, and I feel that the core experience is similar enough, like with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. Funky mode be damned. Now don't worry, that doesn't mean I'm going to be playing a half-sequel like Splatoon 2 over the original Splatoon, just playing the Switch versions if they happen to already be the exact same game under the hood. I hope this gave you enough perspective into my personal history with the Wii U before we start diving into the games properly. Now, first up, we're going to be talking about Nintendo Land, the game I feel is most representative of what the Wii U could have been, and New Super Mario Bros. U, the game that I feel helps represent some of the problems that the Wii U faced throughout its lifespan. I'm also going to be talking about the Super Luigi U DLC, which raises a lot of eyebrows. It's kind of good. From there, we'll be bouncing around in non-chronological order, based on a couple of different factors. My mood, the games I'm interested in playing, how long a game is, trying to break up shorter games with longer games, etc. Well, with all that in mind, I hope you look forward to future videos where we take a U-turn to look at the Wii U's greatest hits.